Hi, this is Dr. Lou Graham, and our segment of the new norm today really will get into all the new legislation that's coming down that's impacting all of our offices. But before I get into that, I just have to say that this virus continues to hit home to all of us. And recent news says that we lost a dentist in Tennessee, an assistant in Washington, and honestly, there are tears in my eyes. My hearts go out to lost colleagues who were doing what they were trained to do to take care of people. And this just goes into what we're all facing and how serious this really is. Okay, deep pause. And with that said, what I really want to get into today with Nolan Yaldo from Howard and Howard, I want to get legal thought, and I want to get his opinions on this, and his opinions are really his opinions. These are meant to guide you when you're talking to your lawyer and talking to your accountant. So understand these are his opinions, and if you want to reach out to us with more and more questions, that's what we're here for. Again, we're building this community. So we're talking about building this community. So you would go to education@midwaydental.com with more questions, because this is going to be in a series of segments, and hopefully we'll be able to be answering questions and posting bulletins and alerts on this site. So with that, I'm going to bring Nolan Yaldo into this conversation and start asking him first. Let's kind of go over this new legislation and how it impacts all of us. Nolan, welcome to the show, if we even want to call it a show, but thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you for your time. Our hearts go out to all those that have been lost due to this virus. Thoughts and prayers with everyone. I hope everyone is safe and well. And again, Lou, thank you for having me on the show.
So, Nolan, let me just ask you, if we could just kind of get into the different segments. As we had been talking earlier, I know there are 3 segments to this new legislation. And even as we were talking, you said a new IRS announcement had just come out. So obviously this is fluid in motion. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to you, and let's start talking about these essential pieces. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So as you stated, there are a couple components to this. I would say the first component is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act that has been enacted into law. And the second component is the IRS Treasury pronouncements with respect to payment of taxes and deferral of the payments thereof. So the first portion, which is hot on everyone's mind, is the Families First Corona Response Act. And what does it do to your small business? There are 3 components. The first component is an expansion of the Family Medical Leave Act. The second component is a Paid Sick Leave Act. And the third component is a refundable tax credit for any payments that you had to have made under the FMLA or the Emergency Paid Leave Act. So those are the 3 skeleton components of the act. And we can dive first into the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act, which is dealing with the FMLA. So do you have any questions or thoughts as it relates to that initially before I go into that?
No, I think you're right on. Let's go heavy right now into that, because that's primary to all of our listeners. So let's hit that one first.
So what the new law does is it relates to individuals who have been affected by COVID-19. And with respect to the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act, employers with 500 or less employees should provide 12 weeks or up to 12 weeks of leave for the employees that have been employed for 30 days. So the employee's only requirement to qualify for this is that they had been employed for 30 days. And now what this specific portion of the act specifically applies to is employees who are unable to work or telework due to the need to care for a son or daughter under the age of 18 years old if their school or place of daycare has been closed due to the COVID-19. That's the only qualification or only way to qualify to receive these up to 12 weeks of paid leave potentially. Now, how does that work? There's a few components. The first 10 days or the first 2 weeks are unpaid, and the employee can take pay. You can use PTO, can use vacation time, or other type of accrued paid time off in those 10 days. So the employer does not have to pay the employee for those 10 days, but the employee can use PTO. The remaining 10 weeks are paid by the employer. Now, the rate of pay for those 10 weeks is at 2/3 of the employee's regular rate that they're due. So it's not a full freight, but it's 2/3 freight that you'd have to pay to an employee who qualifies because they're unable to work or telework because a school has been shut down. The final piece of this is that the amount of pay cannot exceed $200 per day and cannot exceed $10,000 in total. So sort of to summarize this is there is a new portion of the FMLA that says if you're unable to work or telework, you can receive up to 12 weeks leave. 2 weeks are unpaid, but you can use PTO, and the remaining 10 weeks would be paid at 2/3 your rate. If you're a part-time employee, what that calculation is depends on the number of hours that you've worked in the past 6 months. So there's a little bit of math that needs to be done in that respect.
Okay.
But at the moment, this is what we know.
So here's my takeaway. So most dentists are obviously in offices they own that are absolutely under 50 employees. Routinely, most of us, like my own, have, whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20, but 50 employees would be a lot. So I want to dive a little deeper into this before we get any more. So here's a doctor having a team meeting, and now he is now discussing with each team member option one. Option one, then, as you have just said, would be one of his or her employees who have to stay home to take care of their child who no longer either has daycare or school to go to. Those individuals would be then applicable to using their their personal time off, whatever's remaining in that, and I'm just walking through this, and potentially some vacation days. They can use those days because the first 14 days are not covered. This would help cover it. And then after that, 2/3 of their salary, up to $200 a day with a maximum of 10 grand, that is where those employees would fall into as a subset of the overall employees. Is that kind of where I'm going with this group of people?
Yeah, no, that's accurate. So yes, couldn't have said it any better. There are certain exceptions in the act and regulations that can be passed by the Secretary of Labor as it relates to medical and dental professions. We have not yet seen any of those regulations, but to the extent we do and what that means for those professions, I can definitely follow up with you and let you know after that.
Okay, so I just see here's the issue in a dental office, so we're all clear. The employees are going to fall into different subsets, and each office is going to have to figure out, Nolan, where their employees fall into. And this is why this is a great conversation, because I get it as a dentist and I'm talking to you who's the expert. Okay, so we have that subset of individuals in an office. So, and we'll get to unemployment ultimately for those individuals, but I'm specific on that subset. Let's go to the next subset.
Correct. So the next portion of the act is the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. And what that does, again, is it applies to companies with 500 or less employees to offer paid sick time to any employee regardless of how long they've been employed. Now, the key under the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act are the following. These are the ways to qualify as an employee. 1, you're subject to federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation related to COVID-19. You've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to the concerns related to COVID-19. You're obtaining a medical diagnosis or care for experiencing symptoms of COVID-19. You're caring for an individual who is subject to a quarantine or has been advised by a healthcare provider to quarantine. Or you're caring for a son or daughter if their school has been shut or is unavailable. Or you're experiencing any symptoms or similar conditions that would be specified by the Secretary of Health and Human Services in connection with the Secretary of Treasury and Secretary of Labor. Now, this last one appears to be some type of a catch-all where they can still say if you're experiencing X, Y, and Z, you would still be eligible for the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. What the act does is it provides employees with approximately and generally 2 weeks of paid time off. Now, the specifics as it relates to this depend on which of the categories you're falling into. So if you're in a meeting with staff, or you're talking to your office manager, or you're talking to human resources, how you determine what people are eligible for really comes down to what category they fall into. So if you are part of you are subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine, you've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine, or you're obtaining a medical diagnosis or care for the symptoms of COVID-19, you would essentially be receiving 100% of your hours at your rate, but shall not exceed $511 per day or $5,110 in the aggregate. For all other situations that I've stated earlier, there's about 2/3 of your rate that's paid to you, which shall not exceed $200 per day or $2,000 in total. I think the thought behind this is that, as a general matter, from at least what we've been hearing, is that the COVID-19 symptoms could potentially, in normal situations, come and go in about 2 weeks, or you need about 2 weeks to be quarantined, self-quarantined, so that you are not spreading the virus and are able to get healthy. And what Congress is trying to do is provide employees who are saying, hey, I need 2 weeks of paid leave to be able to cope with this, some reassurance and backstop for the employees. So now you're talking to your office staff. You've got, again, 2 things in the arsenal based on what Congress has done, based on the expansion of the FMLA and the grant of the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, to offer to your employees who are a little scared and a little terrified about what's going on right now.
So let me try to come into my world on this. So basically, the guidelines in the dental world are currently absolutely zero elective dentistry. And in many senses, we're just trying to do teledentistry. And we're trying to figure out how we can safely do emergency dentistry. And we'll get to that in future segments. because, as you said, I'm not sure, and I think this is all going to be fluid in motion. I'm not sure 2 weeks is going to be enough to tell an employee that it's safe to come back based on all the latest research. So I guess here's my question. If we're telling employees, and this may go into our third part of this, if we're telling employees not to come back to work because of the virus, and they don't have the virus, at least we don't think they do, but we're just closing the office down, do they fall into this category, or is that the category that's coming up next?
So I think the answer is, unfortunately, the way to qualify under what Congress has been passing is to have some nexus or connection to COVID-19. So in the sense of an employee needs to stay home because a child is home because all of the schools in the state of Michigan are shut down, for example. Or you're sick with the virus, or you're quarantined because a county in X state has said we're in lockdown mode. So the unfortunate part is that this has to be tied to COVID-19. If an office is just considering shutting down because of a lack of foot traffic, a lack of patients, a lack of ability to staff, because people are understandably worried, in that situation, you need to be talking to your expert advisors in the state which you're in to consider what you can do to continue to support your staff, or if you need to be considering layoffs to allow people to seek unemployment benefits. Part of the legislation has been to the federal government to support state governments and provide additional funding for unemployment insurance claims. So the federal government is trying to stem the difficulties that are going to hit families individually. And I think the next series of legislation that may start coming down the pike hopefully are aimed to help the small business themselves, although there's a few things that we can talk about in terms of what support there is actually for the small business. One potentially being SBA loans, which we can get into, Lou. And the third part of the act is the tax credits. So if we're ready, we can go into that.
So we'll hang on with the tax credits for 1 second. So let me just ask you this. So if the policy of, let's say, the state's dental organization national policy is really only emergency dentistry or teledentistry, because right now we're in this state of flux, it really then becomes really the issue of, with these employees, of what to do with them that covers them. And if I'm listening to you correct, this is really a state-by-state decision at this point, because we're not under a national quarantine. So really it goes by what's going on in your city or state that will guide you in a sense of whether you can use the COVID clause in this case, or they just basically have to be laid off in a sense temporarily and go through the unemployment process. Is that correct?
I think that's a fair statement, Lou. Yes. The legislation is tied to COVID. Either you're sick, or you're caring for someone who's sick, or you're quarantined and you literally can't leave your house to go to work if you were otherwise available or able. And there are instances where the statute and the act makes reference to telework. So again, we'd have to speak. Everything's a fact-by-fact circumstance and basis that would have to be analyzed. But yeah, I think you're on the right track in the sense of there's either a hook to COVID, or we're talking about possibly some SBA loans, which we can get into if the small business qualifies to continue to fund payroll, to continue to pay operating expenses, to continue to pay rent. Or, if the worst is going to happen, talk about layoffs, potential layoffs, and the unemployment benefits, which would be governed by the state locality that you're in, or the state that
Okay,
you're in.
so the way I'm looking at this is, and here's the true reality of us as small business operators. If the first two options really apply, we can use those for specific employee situations. And the third employee situation is that if we do have to do layoffs, it's my understanding that if we want to offer our employees, basically our family, their part-time off benefits to use, their vacation time to use, after they use such, they could, or during such, they could then file for unemployment, and that would begin after these benefits expire. And is that correct?
I think you'd have to check based on the laws of each state in terms of what that could do. As a general matter, I think you're going to have to check in specifically because each state's a little bit different. And what I don't want to have happen is doing something along those lines jeopardizes the unemployment insurance that the employee would otherwise be able to receive. So in that regard, that's something that you need to speak to with your advisor to consider how to plan that out.
Okay, but I would say it's rather urgent if offices are closed to get at least what we're talking about. This is level 1 urgency for an office. Understand what's available in benefits, understand the new legislation, and then really talk to your advisors to talk about whether we have to shift our team to a temporary layoff and go for unemployment until we really resume operations, or those employees that will still be coming into the office to do parafunctional work, whether insurance billing, catching up on things, or working in emergency type situations. I'm getting that as kind of the conclusion of this first part of our segment. Would that be okay to say?
I would think that's a fair statement. I think that's a fair statement. There's a lot of analysis that needs to go into this. Every office is going to have specific circumstances that may not be unique across the board.
Right.
It's a conversation that needs to happen. We're obviously trying to educate our healthcare providers who are doing a phenomenal job and putting their lives at risk to continue to care for us. So we deeply appreciate that wholeheartedly. But yeah, there's a conversation that needs to happen, analysis that needs to happen. But yes, I think that's a global fair statement. And there's also yet a third part of the act. If I'm preempting you, apologies, but there's a third part of the act that maybe the dentists are excited to hear about, in the sense of, if you are making payments under the expanded FMLA Act or the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, there are refundable tax credits to the business itself for making those payments. So if you have employees that are hit and are suffering with the COVID-19 virus, or are qualifying under the FMLA Act or the Sick Paid Leave Act, there are tax credits that are available to the business for those payments that you're making. And there's calculations that go into them, but essentially what you have is, if you're making a payment as an employer for an employee under the FMLA Act or the Sick Paid Leave Act, as we've discussed in this show, when it's time in the next quarter to make payments for your portion of Social Security tax, you can deduct against that tax what you've paid, and it's a refundable credit. So essentially what the government's trying to do at a high level is say that if any of your individuals in your office need this time off because of these situations related to COVID-19, we're going to give you a refundable tax credit to help keep the business afloat, in a sense, have the government pay those additional wages for the leave or for the employee paid sick leave.
So I get it. So if an office has enough cash in their account, in their checking account, or they get a loan, from which we'll talk about, then they could go this route. And then basically it's dollar for dollar, whatever they're spending to carry these wonderful employees, they'll get it back dollar for dollar later on. That's my interpretation, correct?
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Remember, the first two parts of the act, the family medical leave portion or the emergency paid sick leave, there's caps on how much you're paying, right? So you're paying $10,000 in total, or you're paying $5,100 in total approximately. So whatever those payments that are capped are that you've made from cash reserves would be creditable against taxes that you owe. So there's going to be yet another type of calculation that comes into play that you're going to be working with your accountant. Okay, how much Social Security tax do I owe for the quarter? How much payments have I made to employees directly related to COVID? And then where does the calculation shake out? Am I getting a refundable tax credit? Meaning once you break the plane of zero, now money is due back and owing to you.
Right. And so I get it. So now the reality is that if we're carrying employees for $5,000 and $10,000 over the next, let's just say 4 to 8 weeks, the majority of offices are going to need additional money, because that's just the reality of where we are in this profession. It's just nobody expected this pandemic. So before we go down to more legislation, what are the options through the legislation about getting loans? Where do we go, Nolan?
So I think at this point, for the small business owners, the guys who are up at night thinking about the welfare of their employees and their safety and how they're going to keep the lights on and continue to make payroll, look into the disaster relief portions of the Small Business Administration website. It's called the SBA. And there are programs that are coming out with respect to small business loans. Now, what the criteria are, what qualifications are, look at the website. But there are avenues for these small businesses to say, look, I believe we're going to come out on the other side of this wholeheartedly, but in the meantime, I want to continue to pay rent. I want to continue to pay my staff who are sitting at the desk helping us do teledentistry, etc. But I need a loan. I need a short-term loan, a medium-sized range loan at a low interest rate, and work with the SBA to get that package to help you get through this. So check the SBA, Small Business Administration, sba.gov, I believe, for that information to see if you qualify. I think that's going to be a resource that a lot of people are turning to. I know some of my clients have already turned to that, and we're in discussions for qualifications and to get this short-term loan to bridge the gap to the day where we see the other side of this.
In fact, I would say then, in summary, I would say every dentist who's looking at the next 8 to 12 weeks of unsure, we're just not sure, going to that address and at least starting the paperwork would be what I would be doing. And then obviously now in summary, really talking to my accountant and my advisor. And again, if people don't have such an advisor, they can absolutely call you and become a client. But I would absolutely say those are next steps, because we have to ensure our own financial security. So I would say that's what my summary is from this first half an hour of discussion.
Yeah, and Lou, I would say, even before you start to pick up the phone and talk to an expert advisor about the legislation, I would get on the SBA's website to see if you could start that paperwork now. Would be my recommendation. Don't waste the time. I think the website is going to be crowded. I don't know if it's crashed yet. I'm not saying that, but you can think that with the amount of traffic going into the website that it'll be slow. So I urge everyone, and I've been urging everyone to go after that as soon as possible. I think that's a right now type move.
Okay. Great first part of this summary. I think we have to be talking action steps for the team. And yep, I can't thank you enough, Nolan, on that. So Nolan, why don't we go into the next thought on legislation? Let's get into the tax consequences of what's going on with quarterlies, personal income tax. Let's go right into that if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll have to forgive me because the information that I'm about to tell you appears to have been now essentially surpassed, and the IRS is coming out with new requirements. As of yesterday, what has happened was the IRS said you could defer. Let me take a step back. There are two sets of businesses. There are these consolidated C Corps and consolidated groups and C Corps, which are eligible for deferral of up to $10 million. And there are individuals, presumably most dentists, who own flow-through entities, S Corps or partnerships or disregarded entities, who could defer about $1 million in tax. So we all know that tax is due on April 15th for the calendar year 2019. We also know that that first quarterly estimated tax is due on April 15th as well. Yesterday, the IRS said, or as of yesterday, the IRS said that those payments that would otherwise be due April 15th could now be due July 15th. And I believe what's happening, and I'm trying to scroll through to find some of the information, is that there may be now extensions of when you can file, because before it was you still had to file on April 15th the return or file for an extension on April 15th with the amount due or the tax due July 15th. I think the IRS is changing that, so there's still more to come on that. We have to digest it and see. It's literally just popping up on my screen as we're talking on this interview. So I think essentially what this does, Lou, is it gives that small business owner and that dentist who may otherwise owe money for a great 2019 on April 15th, the ability to push that payment into the middle of July and say, hey, now I've got some excess cash flow. I don't need to take a cash distribution to pay my taxes. I could keep that money in the business until we weather this storm, or Congress passes additional legislation, or until I get my SBA loan, etc., to continue to pay payroll, which I know is on the minds of everyone.
Right. So I think how we're following this is we've covered the business loans, we've covered payroll options to everybody, and now we're able to defer some of our taxes. Again, a good thing with this cash flow time. Yep, I get it. Go on.
I think at this point now, those are the tools in your toolbox, so to say. Those are your tools in your arsenal in terms of how to come at this, what to do for your employees. I urge everyone to continue checking the CDC website and CDC guidelines. I'm sure, Lou, you're going to be educating your folks on making sure and screening patients before they come in for any emergency surgeries. Have you been out of the country? Have you traveled in the last 14 days? Are you coughing? Do you have any respiratory illnesses? I know clients have been contacting me about that. What should we be doing? How should we be properly screening individuals, etc., etc.?
I'm with you. Sorry about the background noise, but somebody's got to be employed, so I guess it's the person cutting our lawn. I appreciate it. So,
no worries.
Nolan, as we wrap this segment up, or segments up, what I'd like to do is, again, tell everybody, obviously, this is Nolan's opinions. I think I'm being invaded as we speak. But these are Nolan's opinions. We urge you to obviously get together with your team, urge you to deal with discussion with the business loans and where we go from there. I would absolutely send an email to education@midwaydental.com. And Nolan, I'm going to follow back with you next week. Sorry about the barking dog, but that's life.
Okay.
I'll follow back up with you, and we may have to have a mini follow-up segment if that's okay with you.
Yeah, no, I think we're going to need to because, again, something popped up on my screen the minute,
Right.
we start talking about the IRS issues or new rules, I should say, for filing and for payments. Mitch McConnell in the Senate is doing things to help families. We'll continue to monitor as it relates to any other relief to small businesses, but I urge everyone to check the SBA website. But yeah, definitely available next week to bring up any other new pronouncements that have come out or new legislation, and to educate your folks. I hope everyone is healthy, is strong. Hearts go out to everyone affected by this, but please be safe, be strong, and be well.
Thanks so much. We'll be back in touch. This is the new norm. Yeah, Dr. Lou Graham. We'll talk to you very shortly. Have a good day. Thank you. So let me be clear. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. So what we want you to do is we want you to go to education@midwaydental.com. Shoot us your questions. We'll go right to the experts. I know I'm not the expert, so let's go ask the experts what we should be doing as our next step next week, the week after, and thereafter. I look forward to hearing from you.